When I was a little boy, a whole lot, I started to say every, but not every, but a whole lot of the Sunday night sermons, because we had church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night at least, and as a preacher's kid, I was at all of them. But the Sunday night service was considered an evangelistic service, and I can't tell you, the majority of the time in my memory, the Sunday night sermons were about the end times, about what was going to happen at the end, about the rapture, and how we were going to be, Christians were going to be caught away and taken away from here, and this horrible thing called the Great Tribulation was going to happen. And in the popular theology of the day, here's how it worked. Life goes on as normal, everything is fine. Rapture, all the Christians disappear. All hell breaks loose for 7 years. While the Christians are gone, they're off planet, they're somewhere else, they're in some heavenly realm. Down on earth, all hell is breaking loose. There's Antichrist, and there's Mark of the Beast, and there's beheadings, and there's torture, and there's creatures coming out of the ground stinging people, and it's just the worst horror movie you can imagine lived out in real life. This was what we expected. And so a lot of the sermons were about being ready for the rapture, so you can miss all of the bad stuff. It's going to get nasty here on earth. Get ready, get your heart right with God so you can be taken away and not left behind. And this language of this period of time, 7-year period of time called the Great Tribulation, the language of that is taken out of Matthew 24 from the lips of Jesus. And we finally get to that in our lesson tonight. So I hope you've been watching over the past 6 weeks. But what the point has been all through this time is to show you that the things Jesus spoke about were not 21st century things or things in our future. The things Jesus was speaking about, wars and rumors of wars, the gospel being preached, you'll be persecuted, all of these things are first century events, not 21st century. And I'm going to say the same thing about the Great Tribulation. So let's pick up Matthew 24. We're picking up right where we left off. Matthew 24, verse 21. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. So this is it. This is it. This is the Great Tribulation. This is what we've all been dreading and hoping we would miss. This is what the terrifying movies of my childhood were about. We used to have some, Christian movie rental place come through, and on a reel-to-reel they would set it up, and the youth group would watch movies like Sound of a Distant Trumpet, some others, Larry Norman, who at the time, and still, was one of my favorite Christian singers, the father of Christian rock and roll, and a big-time, end times, dispensationalist guy. So he wrote songs like, I Wish We'd All Been Ready. Life was filled with guns and war, and everyone got trampled to the floor. I wish we'd all been ready. And it's a whole song about the tribulation, and gee, I wish we'd all been ready for it, but you weren't, so too bad, you're toast. This is it. This is what we've all been afraid of, and we're finally there tonight. And I want to point out to you, again, I did this in the first session, that the Greek word for tribulation, when Jesus says there shall be great tribulation, the Greek word is thlipsis. And the word literally means trouble, suffering, oppression, affliction, persecution. It wraps all of these words into one. Thlipsis. Bad times is what the word means. And Jesus is telling the listeners that the suffering about to come upon Jerusalem would not be run-of-the-mill suffering. It wouldn't be having to deal with a pandemic. It wouldn't be some inconveniences. It would be horrific, life-altering, world-altering, culture-altering. It would be great suffering, great oppression, great affliction, great persecution, great tribulation. But I want you to notice, and maybe you've never seen this before, and once you see it, it's kind of, oh, wow, there it is, right there in black and white. I want you to notice the time setting for this great tribulation that Jesus himself gives us in the text. Listen. The verse before this is, this gospel of the kingdom must be preached into all the world as a witness to the nations, and then the end, and we saw last week the end of the old covenant, the end of the old age, and then the end will come. And we saw last week that indeed, in the lifetime of the apostles, the gospel was preached in all the known world, all throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. And then Jesus picks up, for then, when this gospel's preached, for then there will be great tribulation. Notice the setting, notice the time frame. There will be great tribulation, such as has not been seen from the beginning of the world until now. No, and never will be. Jesus isn't positioning this great tribulation at the end of history. He's not setting it on a calendar or on a timeline as one of the very last things to happen. He's setting it smack dab in the middle of history. He's setting it in his own time frame. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been seen from the beginning of the world until now. Now. His generations now, and never will be. No, never will be. You'll never see anything like this again. And so some people say, well, man, don't tell me that you think what happened in AD 70 was never to be seen again that bad. I mean, 6 million Jews died under Hitler in World War II. You're not telling me, Ken, you're not telling me that the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem was worse than that. Yeah, 6 million Jews died, and it was a horrible loss of life. But in Jerusalem, which, by the way, the destruction of Jerusalem is to this day mourned by the Jewish world. Not only was there the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives, but there was the loss of everything. The temple was destroyed. Now, for us, that's the church on the corner of the block, or even the Vatican, or Canterbury Cathedral, or some notable landmark of a church. No. For the Jews, the temple is literally where God lives. The Ark of the Covenant is held in the temple, the very throne of God, the presence of God. When the temple was built under Solomon, the Bible says after they built it and they prayed prayers to consecrate it, the glory of God, the overwhelming tangible presence of God, the seeable, touchable, smellable, the real tangible presence of God came down into the temple and was so strong, the priest had to leave and had to stop doing their liturgy. We're talking about where God dwells. And suddenly, it's one stone not left upon another. Suddenly, it's completely abolished. Not only was the temple abolished, not only was the city destroyed, the Aaronic priesthood, the priesthood of Aaron, the brother of Moses, the priesthood of Israel, gone. The sacrifices that were offered for the sins of the people, gone. All the ritual, all the liturgy, all the rites, everything in their world was gone. In fact, it was so devastating that it took 20 years after that for a group of Jewish scholars, Pharisees, to get together in another city and say, we have to reinvent Judaism. We have to rebuild. It's called the Council of Jamnia. They came together and said, we have to rewrite what Judaism even is now. So, yeah, nothing this bad ever before or ever again. And Jesus sets the time frame for this great tribulation within the framework of the lives of the people to whom he was talking. He goes on and says, if those days had not been cut short, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe him. For false Christ and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I've told you beforehand. So if they say to you, look, in the wilderness, he's in the wilderness, do not go out. And if they say, look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far to the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For the next 5 minutes, I'm going to read you 2 long quotes from an eyewitness to the destruction of Jerusalem. This man's name was Josephus. He was a Jew. He was an eyewitness to what happened. These 2 particular quotes are fascinating in response to what I just said, Jesus warning the people about. Don't go out into the wilderness if somebody says the Messiah is here. Don't go into the inner room if someone says the Messiah is here. Listen. First paragraph, or first reading from Josephus, 2 pages long. Now, as for the affairs of the Jews, they grew worse and worse continually. For the country was again filled with robbers and impostors who deluded the multitude. Certain of these robbers went up to the city as if they were going to worship God. This is when Jerusalem is being laid siege to by Rome. And they had daggers under their garments. And by thus mingling themselves among the multitude, they slew Jonathan the high priest. And as this murder was never avenged, the robbers went up with greater security at the festivals after this time. These works that were done by the robbers filled the city with all sorts of impiety. And now these impostors and deceivers persuaded the multitudes to follow them into the wilderness and pretended that they would exhibit manifest signs and wonders that should be performed by the providence of God. And many that were prevailed on by them, suffered the punishment of their folly. For Felix brought them back and then punished them. Moreover, there came out of Egypt about this time to Jerusalem one that said he was a prophet, and advised the multitude of common people to go along with him to the Mount of Olives, as it was called, which lay over against the city, at a distance of about 5 furlongs. He said farther that he would show them from there how at his command the walls of Jerusalem would fall down, and he promised that he would procure them an entrance into the city through these walls when they were fallen down. Now when Felix was informed of these things, he ordered his soldiers to take their weapons, come against them with a great number of horsemen and footmen from Jerusalem, and attacked the Egyptians and the people that were with him. He also slew 400 of them and took 200 alive. But the Egyptian himself escaped out of the fight and did not appear anymore. Do you hear what happened? These guys came and said, come out into the wilderness, just exactly as Jesus had warned. But this next one, another 2 pages, is even more remarkable from the pen of Josephus. Because remember, Jesus said, if they say, here he is in the inner room, don't go. Here's what happened. When Jerusalem was besieged by Rome, and when it was just about to fall, here is what Josephus recorded. The Romans have broken through. They've broken through the walls. They're in the city now. And it took them about a week to take over the whole city. Okay, here's Josephus. And now the Romans, judging that it was in vain to spare what was round about the holy house, the temple, burned all those places, as also the remains of the cloisters and the gates, 2 excepted, one on the east side and one on the south, both which, however, they burned afterward. They also burned down the treasury chamber. These are rooms in the temple, on the temple grounds. These are rooms in the inner part of the temple grounds. Listen, they also burnt down the treasury chambers, in which was an immense quantity of money and an immense number of garments and other precious goods there deposited. And to speak all in a few words, there it was that the entire riches of the Jews were heaped together, while the rich people had there built themselves chambers to contain their furniture. The soldiers came to the rest of the cloisters that were in the outer court of the temple, where the women and children and a great mixed number of people fled, in number about 6,000. But before Caesar had determined anything about the people, or given the commanders any orders relating to them, the soldiers were in such a rage that they set the cloister on fire, by which means it came to pass that some of these were destroyed by throwing themselves down headlong, and some were burned in the cloisters themselves, nor did any one of them escape with his life. How in the world would 6,000 people, how did that happen? Oh, here it is. He continues. A false prophet was the occasion of these people's destruction, who had made a public proclamation in the city that very day that God commanded them to go up to the temple, and that there they should receive miraculous signs of deliverance. I'm done reading Josephus for the moment, but I hope you get the point. Josephus recorded as an eyewitness precisely what Jesus warned about 40 years earlier. The Great Tribulation is not a 21st century, 25th century future thing. The Great Tribulation is not something Christians are going to be raptured away to keep from avoiding. The Great Tribulation was the great affliction and suffering and torment and persecution that befell the people of Israel in the first century. And I'm going to wrap up in about 2 minutes with the next verse from Matthew 24. He says there'll be great tribulation. Don't go in if they say the Messiah is there. Don't go out to the wilderness. And then these words. A rather cryptic phrase. Matthew 24:28. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Now, everybody from Texas knows what it looks like for something to be dead in the woods or dead in the pasture and the buzzards circle. You know, that's in the old Western movies, the fellow's out in Death Valley dying of thirst, and maybe he's going to make it or maybe not, and then he looks up and sees the buzzards circling, just waiting for him to die. Well, Jesus is using the same language. Where the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. The only thing is, Jesus uses this Greek word, aetos, A-E-T-O-S, aetos. And in Greek, the word has two different meanings. It means vulture. It is also the Greek word for eagle. Want to guess what the official symbol of the Roman Empire was? An eagle. You know what happened when they finally broke into the temple and slaughtered everybody that was around, and blood was flowing so thick the Roman soldiers were slipping and falling from slippery floors? They finally made it into the Holy of Holies. They set up an eagle and offered incense to Caesar as a deity. Imagine, if you will, you being one of these people locked inside Jerusalem, it having been laid siege to for months and years, people starving to death, people killing their children and cooking them and eating them just to survive. Imagine you in this horrible condition, and you look out, and there, surrounding the city on every side, are troops, are companies of Romans, and each one has this standard on a pole, this standard of an eagle. And they're flying their battle flags, and they have eagles. Where the corpse is, there the eagles will gather. And they did. And Jerusalem was left a corpse. And that was the Great Tribulation. And that's the end of the lesson for tonight. Next week, some of you may be thinking, well, everything you've said so far just makes a lot of sense. In fact, maybe for the first time ever, everything you've said, this makes sense to me. Next week is where some people get hiccups. Because that's the time, when we get to it next week, where Jesus says, and there will be signs in the heavens above. The moon will be turned red. The stars will fall from the sky. And a lot of you listening might be saying, come on, Ken, don't tell me you think that happened in the first century. And my answer is, yep, absolutely. What Jesus said happened in the first century. So I'll see you next week when we tackle stars falling from the sky.